So, a very good morning to all.
Good morning, sir.
Right. Today's session was a last minute call as the speaker could not, our designated speaker could not be present due to some assignments in schedules. So we thought that why not have a discussion on the budget? And although it would not be possible to have the entire budget discussion on in 1 hour. So what we thought that let's take key amendments which have taken place. And among the key amendments, let's take section 74A and section 128A because these are the two hot topics which are going around by way of budget. So starting with section 74A, and since this is an SMS, so I have the opportunity to discuss in detail the final nitty-gritties of the amendments. I would be straight away going to section 74A. Before going to section 74A, is the screen visible?
Yes, visible.
Okay. So before going to section 74A, let's discuss briefly about section 73 and 74 because new subsections have been inserted in section 73, 74, 7312 and 7412 which provide that the provisions of this section shall be applicable for determination of tax pertaining to the period up to financial year 2023-24. Now the question comes that this says that the determination of tax pertaining to the period up to financial year 2023-24. So this is clearly coming out that whatever assessments would be done for the period up to 23-24 would be done under section 73 and 74, and post 1st April 2024, that is financial year 2024-25, section 74A would be applicable. Now the question comes that still there have been 4 months which have passed away since 31st of March 2024, and 74A is yet to be notified. And as it is expected that it would take another 2 to 3 months to get it notified. So by that time, at least 6 to 7 months would have passed away. Now the question comes that supposedly I have filed a DRC 03 for period 24-25 in the meantime under section 73 or 74, or there is a search and an inspection taking place at the premises of a business person, and at the in that search some voluntary payment is made under section 73 or 74 for financial 2024-25. Now that what happens to that determination, because as such there is no transitional provision between 73, 74 and 74A which should have been there. So unless until they bring a transitional provision or a saving clause for all the proceedings which have been completed in the 73-74 for 2024-25 until 74A comes into picture, there would be a gap between the two timelines, between the ending of 73-74 and starting of 74A. Now, another thing which I would like to share, let's allow me to present the finance bill. Now, this is section 74. This is the heading of section 74. Determination of tax not paid or short paid or erroneously refunded or input tax credit wrongly availed or utilized by reason of fraud or any willful misstatement or suppression of facts. Now what section? Now what the finance bill proposes to do, that they have sought to insert pertaining to the period up to financial year 2024 in the heading after determination of tax. Now they have sought to put pertaining to the period up to financial 2024 after the term determination of tax. So if we go again to the again to section 74. So they have sought to insert pertaining to financial year 2024 after determination of tax. So now it would read determination of tax of the period pertaining up to 2023-24, determination for the period up to 2024 of tax not paid, short paid or LLC refunded, or input tax wrongly availed or utilized by way of fraud or any willful misstatement. In my opinions, the insertion of the term pertaining to the period up to financial year 2024 only for determination of tax would not be sufficient. It should also have been attached to the input tax credit wrongly availed or utilized, because there are two different terminologies which are there. First is determination of tax not paid, short paid, or tax refunded, or input tax credit. So if I'm reading it entirely, determination of input tax credit wrongly availed or utilized is the word by which I am reading, and determination of tax not paid is a separate terminology. So ideally, for the term pertaining to the period up to financial year 2024, 23-24 should also have been separately attached with the phrase of input tax credit.
Arpit, a single doubt here. Does the title to the section control when the body is explicit? Just can it be a reason that the body of the provisions, when they otherwise provide for the determination of ITC, be not workable just because the title does not specify it? So I do not think that that can be a reason to say that ITC provisions will fail.
No, no, I am not saying that because there is something, and there's another thing which I would like to highlight when I would be going through section 74A. That I completely agree that if the main body of the section is coming clearly, then the heading would not work. But another thing which I would like to hide while I will be deliberating on 74A, that's why I have highlighted this. So now coming to section 74A and the final, on a broader reading, what we see that section 74A is more or less merging of section 73, 74. But there have been certain interesting changes which have been made. There have been certain interesting changes which have been made in 74A while they have incorporated section 73 and 74. So starting with the subsection 1 of subsection 1 of 74A. Now, if we go through the initial part where it says where it appears to the proper officer that any tax has not been paid or short paid or erroneously refunded, or where input tax right has been wrongly availed or utilized. This is the first terminology. So before going on to this terminology, I would like to again share section 74. Now, if we go through section 74(1), this is now what is saying where it appears to the proper that any tax has not been paid or short paid or erroneously refunded. Now there is no comma after the term erroneously refunded previously in the section 74. So therefore, whenever we were reading, we were attaching where it appears to the proper officer that any. After that, we will reading it as a combined clause. We were not reading it as a separate clause. But when we go through section 74A, which has been inserted, now there is a comma after the term erroneously refunded. where it appears to the proper officer that any tax has not been paid or short paid or erroneously refunded, now there is a comma. And after that, or where input tax rate has been wrongly availed or utilized, this is now a separate terminology. Now, where it appears is not attaching itself to the term input tax credit. Previously, also it was not attaching because where is coming separately before where it appears to the proper office that any tax and where input tax credit has been wrongly availed. So, where was coming separately, and that's why now they have corrected that error and now put a comma after erroneously refunded. Now, what is the importance of this? Because initially, when Section 74 was there in Model GST law, the terminology used was where any tax has not been paid or short paid. The term it appears was not there. And the reason behind incorporating where it appears, reason behind incorporating the term appears in 73, 74 was given that there has to be a process through which the proper officer would come to the conclusion that a tax has not been paid or short paid or erroneously refunded or input tax rate has been wrongly availed or utilized. So the term appears is being inserted to bring in that process. That's why whenever it is said that section 61 is not a prerequisite for 73, 74, the term appears comes to the rescue of the revenue. So now when they have inserted a comma after erroneously refunded, so that means now where it appears is only attaching itself to tax has not been paid or short paid or erroneously refunded, or now the input tax credit is attaching itself only to where input tax credit has been wrongly availed or utilized. Now the question comes that how that process which was sought to be inserted through the fifth GST Council meeting would be incorporated or inculcated in this input tax credit ITC wrongly availed or utilized for invoking section 73, 74 directly when there is no separate proceedings under any of the sections. So this amendment of insertion of comma after erroneously refunded is in my opinion, it's a big change at how we read section 74A and how we read 73, 74. Shall I move forward? This is the first point for 74A. Now coming to the second part.
Hello.
Hello. Hello.
Hello, sir.
Yes, yes.
Hello. Sir, is this process of DRC 1A, etc., when the input tax credit is auto calculated to the as liability? See, maybe
Sir, your voice is not
mostly-
coming clear.
Hello.
Hello.
Sir, my voice is coming otherwise. Hello.
Yes, yes, yes. Yes, now it's coming.
Sir, maybe find some link between this word appears and the system generated notices in respect of DRC 01A, etc. That
Yes, yes.
is there any link between the procedure in those auto-generating notice when there is no system or otherwise?
Sir,
direct-
could you put your query in the chat box because your voice is breaking. Sir, put your query in the chat box. I will take that query, and in the meanwhile, shall I move ahead to the next point?
Please, sir.
Yes, sir. Now coming to the second amendment which has been made in 74A subsection 1, the insertion of proviso. Now what the proviso says that where provided that no notice shall be issued if the tax which has not been paid or short paid or erroneously refunded or where input tax credit has been wrongly availed or utilized in a financial year is less than 1,000 rupees. So what was the issue with 73? That if I have a tax amount of not paid of say 100 rupees, and if I do not pay within a period of 30 days, then in such case I was settled with a penalty of 10,000 rupees in CGST and 10,000 rupees in SGST. So they have tried to resolve that issue with the insertion of proviso by saying that if the tax which is paid is less than 1000 rupees, then no notice shall be issued under 74A1. Now the question comes, which would be a big issue now, that what is the meaning of tax not paid or short paid? Whether it is solely the amount of tax only, or the term tax not paid or short paid is meant to be either the tax should be paid within the due date, or if it is being paid beyond the due date, then it should be paid along with interest. Because what is happening, I have tried to make three situations for this. Then let's take an example for situation one. The tax not paid is 400 rupees. The interest is 300 rupees. So clearly situation one would be falling within the proviso of section 74A1. But coming to situation two. Now what is actually being done in CGST while issuing the notice? The tax not paid is 1 lakh rupees. Now, while they are framing the notice, they are saying that the tax is 1 lakh rupees, and since you have paid, we are appropriating that amount towards tax. So effectively, they are not reducing the demand. What they are saying, we are appropriating that amount towards the tax amount, and they are separately qualifying the interest of 50,000 rupees. But while they are issuing DRC 07, they are making at some places they are making a declaration that tax is 1 lakh rupees and interest is 50,000 rupees yet to be paid. And some places what they are doing, they are making tax is not to be paid since it is already been paid. Although notice say that it is being appropriated, but while DRC 01, while DRC 07 or 1 being issued, they are making a tax amount of 0 and interest of 50,000 rupees. So, and the third situation is then wherein only interest is required to be paid. So now coming back to proviso 1, proviso to section 74A1. It says that where the tax has not been paid, it is less than 1000 rupees. So clearly there should be a tax which is to be paid along with interest, or only if interest is there, then the amount on which that interest is payable should be lesser than 1000 rupees. Let's take an example that I am filing my 3B. In my 3B, there is a tax amount which is to be paid of 15,000 rupees. And I pay it after 3 days. I file my 3B after 3 days. So filing my 3B after 3 days, the tax would be paid, but there would be an interest which is not being paid. Now that interest is on 15,000 rupees, although there would only be a demand of interest, but that demand of interest would be based upon a tax which is to be paid, which is more than 1000 rupees, which is say in our example is 15,000 rupees. So ideally, whenever the interest amount would be there, the department would be going on to the amount on which that interest is payable, and then only the application of this proviso would be identified, and if at all applicable, if the tax is less than 1000 rupees, then the benefit of this proviso would be given. In my opinion, this is the intent, and this is how term tax not paid or short paid has to be understood, because if straight away only tax amount we treat that this amount this term tax is only for tax not along with interest, then somewhere down the line this interpretation of this provision would not be resulting in the intent and with the thought which through which it has been inserted in 74A1. But yes, either views are possible, and it is up to the government. There is a judgment of Jharkhand High Court wherein they have interpreted tax not paid by way of tax either to be paid before the due date or to be paid along with interest if paid after the due date.
With taxes short paid and not paid, they can directly go by 75/12, right? So the issue is only going to come for the interest on ETC cases where this
Yes, but in some cases there might be an issue wherein the self-assessed liability case would not be there. Because say I am liable to pay an RCM, and that RCM is observed during, say, a scrutiny, but that RCM amount is less than 1,000 rupees. Hello? Hello?
Yes, sir.
So that's why the term tax not paid or short paid has to be still to be understood and clarified by the government, although the courts have clarified. But yes, the doubt still persists on this issue. Now coming to 74A2.
One more question
Yes.
here. In service tax, we had the circular-wise instructions for not proceeding to cases where the demand is less than 1,000. If you remember back in service tax. So in those era, was the 1,000 using only taxes payable for any output tax, or did they include reverse charge dues and SENVAT to be denied?
Communication, I am not aware because I was not dealing in service tax at that time.
Okay. Does anybody remember, did that only include the taxes payable, or was it for SENVAT also? Because practically, even if it was for SENVAT, I believe the field formations were not taking any notices.
Uniji, it was earlier we used to claim for all both the taxes as well as on SENVAT credit matters also. Refund I have never dealt, but I understand even on SENVAT credit, small differences we used to put that circular.
Arpit ji.
Yes, sir.
Good morning, sir. Good morning.
Good morning,
Malhotra from Jammu. Malhotra from Jammu, sir. Sir, this
Yes,
is
sir.
1,000 rupees amount. If you have taken the example of RCM, suppose there are 5-6 cases of RCM, but in 5-6 cases, demand is less than 1,000 rupees. I think they can issue the notice by clubbing all those.
Yes.
That is
Yes,
that
yes.
is quite fast. That
Yes,
has to be there.
Yes, yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So now coming to 74A5 first, then I would be going to 74A. Now there is an interesting amendment in 74A5. They have clubbed both 74 and 73 for the purpose of levy quantification of penalty. And this 74A5 has been put in verbatim equal to section 122(2). Because if we see 74A51, it says the penalty in cases where any tax has not been paid or short paid or erroneously refunded, or where ITC has been wrongly availed or utilized for any reason other than reason of fraud or any willful misstatement or suppression of facts to evade tax. I am restricting myself to this term, other than the reason of fraud or any willful misstatement or suppression of facts to evade tax. Now, before discussing this provision, let's again go to previous section 74. Now, this is the previous section 74. By reason of fraud, comma, or any willful misstatement or suppression of facts to evade tax, again, comma. So this was the term previously. Now what they have done, other than the reason of fraud or any willful misstatement or suppression of facts to evade tax, now no longer there is a comma after fraud. Now, how this term is being read, other than the reason of fraud or any willful misstatement or suppression of facts to evade tax. Now, this is a complete term which is being read without any comma in after fraud. After fraud. Now, the question comes, the terminology of to evade tax, whether it is attaching to fraud, whether it is attaching to willful misstatement or and whether it is attaching to suppression of facts, all the three, or it is attaching itself only to suppression of facts. Because previously there was comma after fraud, so therefore, or any willful misstatement or suppression of facts to evade tax, this was being read as a term. Now, since comma is not there, so now the thought is that what would be happening to the term to evade tax, whether it is attaching to all the three instances or it is attaching only to suppression of facts. So, in my opinion, although there is no clarity, but
Arpit sir,
if
I
we
think, Arpit sir, just to hold it, even this similar provision was there in 122 2B also, where they have not put a comma against that fraud. If you look 122 2B, even in that case, they have stated that for the reason of fraud or any willful misstatement or suppression of fact to evade tax. So, can we look that principle also, sir? Because in the 74,
that
yeah.
is what I am saying, that previously 73 and 74 were not matching with 122. Now they have tried to bring it at par. So this is the first point wherein they
Okay.
have made a change. There is another
Yeah.
point wherein they have made a change. So
Huh.
now if we go through this, because there is no legal interpretation of 122.2 as of now also. But what is the implication of that comma? So what we have to
Hello.
do is we have to discuss within ourselves to come out, because
Okay.
now cosmic dicam is no longer applicable, because for willful misstatement they have inserted a dash between willful and misstatement. So cosmic dicam was saying that willful is being attached with misstatement and suppression, but since they have put a dash between willful and misstatement, so willful is now only attaching itself to misstatement only. So by way of removal of comma and going through the principle
Yeah.
of last incident, rule of
Yeah.
last incident, the term to evade tax is now attaching itself to suppression of facts only. It is no longer attaching itself to willful misstatement of fraud, because it's a combined term in running. Although there might be now what we are coming down to rules of interpretation of English grammar, and
Yeah.
English grammar, it is upon the courts to decide whether the rules have to be inserted or they have not to be inserted. We are only here to discuss, because if we remember the judgment of Canon India and the
Yes.
usage of term the, which completely changed the reasoning of the judgment. So
Yes.
again, by removal of comma, bringing it at par with section 122, the debate would again be open that whether to evade tax is attaching itself to all the three or only with the suppression of fact. Because now we would be dealing where any tax which has not been paid by reason of fraud.
Okay.
Now we will not be reading by reason of fraud to evade tax. Previously also there was a comma, so we were not reading with fraud. But any willful misstatement or suppression of fact, there was a issue
Yeah.
with that.
True.
So
Correct.
again, the discussion would be open for this.
Okay, sir.
Hello.
Sir,
Hello.
one point. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, sir. Now, this to evade tax, what could be a scenario where tax is not paid by reason of fraud, but there is no evasion of tax? Because the word fraud and willful misstatement by default has that malified intent inside it. But whereas suppression of facts may be for evasion of tax, may not be for evasion of tax.
Yes, I
I
agree
am
to this.
completely with you.
Yes.
It is now up to us. See, the amendment has only been made with 2 days. So we will be coming with the situations. We will be facing those situations wherein there might be cases wherein there might be a misstatement which has resulted in tax not being paid or short paid, although it was not to evade tax.
Hello.
Yes.
Sir, honorable courts have always held that when it is fraud, it is always with intent to evade tax. I think even then misstatement is willful. If it is willful, then it is with an intent.
See,
So,
the intent word is no longer there. It is now to evade tax.
yes, it is no longer. Even the word fraud contains this definition that fraud is always to evade tax. Willful misstatement, okay, it is always to evade tax. Suppression, only if it is for evasion of tax. It is the present position. It was the same
when it was decided in pre-GST era about section 11 capital A or so in service tax and central excise, honorable courts have held that when it is fraud, it has inbuilt intent to evasion of tax. I think it is
Let's take an example. For
Yes.
one moment, I am removing that dash from misstatement. For one moment, just for making an example to what the situation you are saying. If dash would not have been there before misstatement, the term would have been willful suppression of facts to evade tax. Okay? On the basis of cosmic item. So willful suppression of facts to evade tax. Now, what is suppression? Anything which is required to be declared in the return, but which has not been declared, is a suppression of facts. So let's take an example that in GSTR 1, I am required to declare the series of invoices. That what is the series of invoices? But I do not declare that series of invoices, and the department also sometimes finds in that assessment that some of the tax has not been paid. Now the question comes that whether non-declaration or willful suppression of those series of invoices was with the was to evade tax, or it was normally an error which did not resulted in the evasion of tax which they had originally found. So willful misstatement might be there, willful suppression might be there. Whether at all it has resulted in evasion of tax, this is a completely new thing which has to be established by the revenue when they are when they are invoking this particular section. So in my opinion, that's why, as I have said also, going forward we would be coming and facing those situations wherein the impact of this term to evade tax would be analyzed, and what has resulted or what has not resulted. I'm not saying that something is resulted, but yes, this is an amendment wherein in cosmic diagram they said that the revenue has to prove three things. One, it should be willful. Second, it is a suppression or a misstatement. Third, it has resulted into evasion of tax, or it was committed with an intent to evade tax, because at that time intent was there. Now intent is no longer there. So in my opinion, by virtue of this, if we are only attaching it to suppression of facts, one of the key ingredients which the revenue was required to prove that it was the willful misstatement were done to evade tax. Now that scope has been taken away. Now they have only to prove that tax has not been paid, and it has not been paid due to only willful misstatement or suppression of facts to evade tax. Since evade tax, in my opinion, by applying rule of large incidents, although there might be a second opinion, I might also change my opinion when the case comes before me. But on a literal reading, this is how I interpret it.
Yeah. Thank
Now
you, sir.
coming to the third and the most important change, one of the most important change which has been made in 74A5. Previously, now we again go to section 74. If we go through the penalty term, it was penalty equivalent to tax specified in the notice. And if we go through section 73, it was equivalent to 10% of tax or 10,000 rupees. This was the terminology. Now what they have done? Bring it at par with section 122. They have done equivalent to 10% of tax due from such person or 10,000 rupees, whichever is higher. And for reason of fraud or any willful misstatement or suppression of facts to evade tax shall be equivalent to the tax due from such person. So the term due was not there previously in the section 73 and 74. Now this term due has been inserted in 74A5, which is at par with section 122. Now section 74A1, which speaks of tax not paid or short paid. 74A5, the main body, which states that any tax which has not been paid or short paid, is different from the terminology which has been used in clause 1 and clause 2, which says about 10% of tax due for the purpose of levy of penalty. I am saying not for the purpose of quantification of determination of tax and interest, but for the purpose of levy of penalty. It is saying that 10% of tax due from such person. So this is a change which has been brought as compared to section 73 and 74 with section 74A5. Now, interestingly, this quantification, which is speaking about 10% of tax due or 10,000 rupees or equivalent to tax due, that is the complete penalty would be quantified as per section 74A 5(1) and 5(2). But if we go through section 74(8), 74A9, now if we go through the here, before service of notice, what I am required to pay the amount of tax along with interest payable under section 50 and a penalty equivalent to 15% of such tax. Now 74A91 is not using the term tax due. Similarly, for 74A912, they say 25% of such tax. Again, due term is not being used here. And when we go through 74A93, it is saying 50% of such tax within 60 days. Again, it is not using the term tax due. So somewhere down the line, 74A5 and 74A9 are not on the same platform. They are moving in two different directions, wherein 74A9 is only speaking about tax which is to be paid, and 74A5 is speaking about tax due. So supposedly, take an example that there is a tax of 1 lakh rupees, there is an interest of say 20,000 rupees, and department initiates an inquiry under section 74A. While they initiate an inquiry under section 74A, I pay the tax amount, but I do not pay the interest and the penalty. Now, but by virtue of 74A5, when it is using the term tax due, I have all the right to say that there is no tax due, because if the intent would have been there, you would have used the same terminology which was used in 74A1 and 74A9, but you have used a different terminology of tax due. So therefore, if I have paid the tax and the tax is no longer due, even though the proceedings might have been initiated under section 74A5, there can be no levy of penalty since there is no tax due. So this is one more important slight change, but having a big impact, because they were knowing that 74 and 73 are not at par with section 122. So therefore, to bring 74A at par with 122.2, they have made the amendment, but somewhere down the line, 74A9 and 74A1 are not going hand in hand with section 74A5.
So one thing I would like to again get a clarification that for the purpose of tax due, is it necessary that I should have filed the return in the return the tax should be due, or what is the manner of tax to calculate the tax due?
In my opinion, whenever they are issuing a notice or supposedly they are issuing an order, and during the proceedings, during the course of proceedings, I have paid the tax, even say before the issuance of order. So at the time of issuance of order, there is no longer there is a tax due. So in my opinion, I will always say that 74A5 speaks for tax due, and that is what we are raising whenever department is initiating 74 with 122. That I will be coming after this point, that whether at all 74 read with 122 was at all required. Now, since this amendment has been made, and once we go through section 75(2)(a), which has been inserted, so that is a completely different point. But since now a categorical amendment has been made, which is speaking of tax due, and if at the time of the issuance of the order there is no tax due, even though the proceeding might have been initiated under section 74A5, then in my opinion, I have all the right to say that there is a different terminology from 74A1 and 74A9. Therefore, it should be read differently. It cannot be read in synchronization with 74A1 and 9. And these are all the amendments which would be discussed at length. So I am not detailing out. This is not the final discussion. There might be counter views. I might have counter views, but this is something which has to be pondered upon in detail while analyzing section 74A.
Arpit, how do you explain this such tax in that case? If you are trying to differentiate the tax due, then what do you take out of the terms such tax 74A9?
74A9.
Yeah.
So, see, again, I would say that 74A5 is the main provision by which the penalty has to be quantified. And since this is the main provision, so 74A9 would only be read along with 74A5. It cannot override 74A5. And such tax has to be read if the tax is due. Then penalty has to be paid. If the no tax is due, then because we are quantifying the penalty as per 74A5. We are not quantifying the penalty as per 74A9. 74A9 is only about the proceedings, how they have to be conducted and what is the amount to be paid. But the quantification is for the interest and tax, it is under section 74A1, and for penalty, it is for 74A5. Therefore, these are the primary sections, and 74A9 would be governed by A1 and A5.
Can we not say that 74A5 is talking about the minimum and maximum penalty, wherein section 74A9 is talking about
Again, sir,
the different
from
circumstances?
From where the maximum penalty would be quantified. The penalty in case where should be. It is not specifying about the maximum penalty. It is only it is the main provision for quantification of penalty. And 74A9 would be taking color from 74A5. This is my opinion.
Yeah, I understand that, but it is a food for thought. If you talk about 74A5, then wherein in clause 1 it says that 10% or the 10,000, whatever the amount is there, whichever is higher, so that is the limit which is in fixed for non-fraudulent assessees, and 100% of tax for the fraudulent assessees,
Tax
right?
due, sir. Tax due. So if we
The
are
tax
saying
due.
that this is a limit, then 74A9 cannot go beyond that limit.
I agree on that, but I'm just trying to analyze 74A9 also. When you talk about such tax, then what do you mean by such tax when we are trying to differentiate tax due and such tax? Then with an example, say I joined late. I didn't know the earlier conversation. But the thing is that if you are talking about a notice wherein the 1 lakh of the interest was tax was calculated, and accordingly the interest and penalty was also calculated. Now, what is the tax due in this scenario? 1 lakh rupees, right?
Yes.
And if that 1 lakh rupee is deposited, that is, I could infer from your conversation that I have deposited the 1 lakh rupees before issuance of the notice. That is what you are talking about?
Yes.
Then in that case, you are saying that 74A9 cannot go beyond, and there will not be any penalty in that case, right?
Yes.
Then what is the meaning of such tax in 74A9? That is what my precise question is.
See, again, what I'm saying that whatever tax which has to be quantified, it has to be quantified on the basis of 74A1. And since 74A1 and 74A5 are using two different terminology, 74A1 is using the term tax, whereas 74A5 is using the term tax due. So for the purpose of quantification of tax, I can always say tax has to be paid along with interest, and only then it would be termed as paid. But for quantification of penalty, I would always see tax due. I would not see whether the tax has been paid along with interest or not, because a different term has been used in 74A5.
I agree on that. Just try to appreciate what I am saying. I'm saying what is the difference you are taking out from due tax and such tax? So what is such tax? That is what my question is. What are you inferring from such tax?
Whenever I would be going to 74A9 first, I would be going to 74A5. I would not be going to 74A9 first. And if a penalty has to be quantified as per 74A5, the amount would be quantified, and if there is no tax due, then in 74A9, I would be treating such tax as no tax due. Because 74A9 is only a procedural section. It is not a quantifying section. Wherever we see 74 in the present scenario also 74(1) is the quantifying section, and on the basis of this the rest of the sections go. Similarly, if I'm going for payment of penalty, first I will be quantifying the penalty as per 74A5, and from that the color of such tax would be taken. This is my opinion. This is what we are doing whenever section 122 is invoked along with section 74 for levy of penalty.
Sir, I have a request. May we go to further posers that you have, sir, in these sections?
Yes, yes, yes.
Please.
But so now coming to section 75(2)(a), we would be discussing 74(a) and 128(a) later on also. But now since the time is short, so just to give an idea of 75(2)(a) and what the CGST department is doing when they are linking 74 read with 122 or 73 read with 122 for levy of penalty. Where any appellate authority or appellate tribunal or court concludes that a penalty under clause 2 of subsection 5 of 74 is not sustainable for the reason that the charges of fraud or any willful misstatement or suppression of acts to evade tax has not been established against the person to whom the notice was issued, penalty shall be payable by such person under clause 1 of subsection 5 of 74A. So that means that if 74A is being invoked, the penalty would only be under either 74A5(1) or 74A5(2). By way of this, they have also clarified that whenever 74A would be invoked, there is no requirement to invoke 122. Had there been any requirement to invoke 122, they would have put that where penalty has been quantified under 122(2)(b) and willful misstatement or suppression of facts is no longer there, therefore penalty would be payable under 122(2)(a). But they have specifically provided that penalty is always payable under 74A5 and 74A5(2), and therefore applying the same principle in 73 and 74, since they also provide for quantification of penalty. In my opinion, there is no requirement to have a reference to 122 while invoking 73, 74, and also the terms used are different, and also the quantification is different. Therefore, 75(2)(a) clearly brings out the intent of the lawmakers that these are self-contained sections. They do not require a support of 122 for levy of penalty. The circular which was there for for penalty in case of the circular which was there for in case wherein there is no supply or issue of invoice without supply of goods also clearly provided in section 75 itself. In 75(12) or 13, whatever the section, also provide that where penalty has been levied under 73, 74, no penalty would be leviable under any other provisions for the same offense. So therefore, whenever we get an opportunity to contest a notice wherein a reference has been made for 73 read with 122 or 74 read with 122, it becomes important to raise the query, because penalty they are levying in 122, and since 120 is no longer applicable, because 73, 74 or 74 as the case may be, 74A as the case may be, a self-sufficient sections. Therefore,
Hello.
no longer
Arpit bhai.
requirement for invoking 122.
Hello, Arpit bhai.
Yes.
Yeah, Arpit bhai, can the authority say that this 75(2) is only coming in the case of where the conclusion is made by appellate authority, appellate tribunal or court? So before conclusion, if he is initiating with 73 or 74A, whatever it may be, he can raise with 122.
No. See, if 122 was required for invoking penalty, then it would have clearly provided that 74A5(2) and 1 would not have been required. Because if there cannot be a case that the assessing authority can levy penalty under 122, but the appellate authority can only levy penalty under 74A5, 1 or 2.
Oh,
it has
okay,
to be either both of them or either none of them.
Okay, got your point.
So in my opinion, since we are reaching to 10 o'clock and the discussion is before there are 5 more minutes, so let's discuss about the timeline of 74A2, and then we will be concluding for today's session and leaving the balance for the next session. 74A2 now provides a time limit for issuance of notice. Now, this is a stark departure from 73 and 74, wherein the time limit for issuance of order was given. And from that order, up 3 months or 6 months gap was given for issuance of the notice. Now they have altered the mechanism wherein they have said that 42 months from the due date of furnishing of annual return should be the due time limit for issuance of the notice under 74A1, and 12 months are given for issuance of the order, and further 6 months are given on the basis of condonation or extension being given by an officer not lower than the status of joint commissioner. So effectively they have retained 60 months. Effectively they have retained the demand for tax and interest, and they have saved themselves from the situation wherein by invoking 74 and issuing some notice after the time period of 73, the entire demand of tax, interest and penalty was being quashed. So effectively by insertion of 74A and these time limits and bringing non-fraud cases and fraud cases on on the same level for issuance of notice, somewhere down the line they have protected the interest of the revenue. And this is coming, if you go through the agenda says that since the officers generally issue the notices on the last date, they do not have the sufficient time to carry out the assessment thereafter. So therefore, it's better that a common time limit is there and sufficient time limit is given for conducting the assessment. So this is coming from a government which says that the assessee should not come on the last day for filing of the return, but they have given a benefit to the officers for issuing the notice on the last date and sufficient time limit after the issuance of notice for conducting the assessments. So this is a one big change wherein they have de-linked from the date of issuance of the order and now linked it with the date of issuance of the notice, and subsequent timelines are coming thereafter. So with this, although 74A is not complete in itself, and as I said that there are some small amendments, and we never know that when these small amendments would come to our rescue or would come to haunt us. So it's better that we analyze these small amendments and see that where they can come to help us and protect ourselves from a situation when they will come to haunt us. So these were the discussions on these amendments, and we will carry forward this discussion in the next session as and when the time is available. So handing over the session back to Venugopalji, since 10 a.m. time is there, and we try to follow the time limit in this SMS.
Arpitji, one last thing, if you can, if you have time, small little point. Hello, am I audible, Arpitji?
Sir, the voice is very light. It is not coming.
Oh, voice is light. Now, is it better now?
Yes, it's better now.
Sir, I was asking that regarding that comma after fraud, though it has been removed from subsection 1, it is still there in subsection 9. Any significance of that?
It is still there in subsection 9. It's still there in subsection 9. I also missed it. Yes, it's still there in subsection 9, but in subsection 1, they have subsection 5, they have removed it.
So, any significance of that in your view?
Sir, again, what I say that these are the amendments. So whenever the department is against us by using that, since the comma has been removed, now it is one common section, we can always say that there is a distinction in 734A9. And as I see that these amendments have been made in a manner that the entire act has not been seen in one synchronization, because in 74A5 they are using the term tax due, and 74A1 and 9 they are not using the same terminology. So yes, this is an issue with 74A9, which is not there in 74A5, and these are two different ways wherein they have used this they have used this comma.
But this has been the bane of GST drafting legislation from the beginning.
Yes.
What you said, the entire act is not read together. Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yes, Venuji. Unikrishan ji, are you there? It seems that there might be some issue with either Unikrishan ji or Venu ji. So I, as a speaker, only conclude the session, and we look forward for your presence and all the participants in the next session. So looking forward for your presence, and thank you very much for coming here and making a discussion on the budget aspects, and looking forward for more in-depth discussion in the coming sessions on the budget and the circulars and the various amendments which have been made in the rules. Thank you very much.
I take opportunity to propose a hearty vote of thanks to Arpit ji for especially taking out time at the 11th hour and still being very elaborate as usual. So thank you very much, Arpit ji, on behalf of the entire group.
Thank you very much. Thank you.